This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and the issue of what is a pandemic, the first pandemic the world has seen since the Spanish flu, 1919, is rocking the world, causing tens of thousands of deaths around the world, creating a crisis for the healthcare system, particularly in the United States, where you have private healthcare, and also a catastrophic world collapse of the economy. And one of the issues that has been raised by this virus is where did it come from, what it is, and the issue of what this means as far as these kind of viruses and also biotechnology. And joining us today is Sam Husseini. He's a reporter with the Institute for Public Accuracy. So Sam Husseini has written an article about the virus and issues. There are disputes about where it came from, how it came about, and the role of governments in dealing with this virus. So welcome to WorkWeek, Sam.
Good to be with you, Steve.
So Sam, why don't you talk about the
sure.
article you did on this virus and the issues that you raised in the article?
There are a lot of layers of this. First off, a lot of the mainstream coverage is presuming or sort of mocking the notion that it didn't come out of the lab. And we simply don't know where it came from. And a lot of, I think, are reacting very defensively to the notion that it might have come out of the lab for multiple reasons. Some mainstream reporting has touted a Nature Medicine article, which simply purported to show that it wasn't bioengineered. But there are a lot of ways something can leak from a lab or come out of a lab in some other way without bioengineering. There's an infrastructure of these biodefense labs, they're usually called, but it's become apparent that biodefense and biowarfare are largely indistinguishable. Biodefense it purports to be defensive, but in the process of being defensive, it asks the question, what can the terrorists or what can nature create that we would need to defend ourselves against? And in the process of doing that, they create more deadly pathogens. That's a major concern. A lot of people in the field, in the legal community, have been concerned that led by the U.S., other governments have also, in effect, worked their way around the prohibitions on creating biological warfare under the pretense of defensive work. So we simply don't know where it came, is the honest answer, unless somebody has insider information that hasn't been divulged yet. And regardless of where it came from, this is a major threat. There have been billions and billions poured into so-called biodefense since 9/11.
And what are the differences? Because now the Trump administration is saying that they're going to investigate whether the Chinese are responsible for this, and that they should. Some states in the United States are suing the Chinese, and there's of course this war between competition between the United States and China, and some right-wing elements are blaming China for having created this to weaken the United States and to dominate the United States. What are your views on this and the political ramifications of this?
Absolutely. Look, I work at the National Press Building, and I asked, the CDC had a news conference on February 11th, and I asked about this then, well before you had a whole right-wing media machine. I think there were some mentions of it, but well before it became a buzz in the right wing. So it's an objective concern. I think that parts of the American right, particularly China-bashing parts of it, are latching onto this issue as a way to demonize China, as a way to demonize Chinese lab work as uniquely evil and nefarious and secret and so on. None of that is the least bit accurate. U.S. labs and biowarfare work is extremely secret. There have been many, many documented accidents in U.S. labs over the years. And there's been a proliferation of these labs, a proliferation of these scientists, tens of billions of dollars since 9/11. And let's not forget that it spiked after 9/11 in large part because of the anthrax attacks. People might recall shortly after the attacks on September 11th, 2001, you had anthrax being sent in the mail to various Congress members, to various media, and it shut down Congress for a time. It was used as part of the sort of fear-induced panic of the Bush-Cheney White House ramming the Patriot Act through and building up the wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. You had media pundits like Andrew Sullivan, media darlings like Richard Butler, pointing fingers at Iraq for the anthrax attacks. It ended up coming out of a US or US allied lab. And there's every indication that the FBI effectively covered up what happened. They ended up dependent on a series of lone wolves, finally pinned it on a guy, Bruce Ivins, who committed suicide. So there was never a real trial. The FBI had to pay out millions of dollars in lawsuits because of their highly questionable investigation in the aftermath. So talk about secrecy. The United States government has been incredibly secretive about the prior main instance of biowarfare that inflicted panic on the American public. And I think that needs to be in our minds as politicians like Tom Cotton and now Trump at a more, at a different level are trying to point fingers at China.
And the issue of the notification about this virus, initially China punished a doctor who was reporting on it, and there was an effort to censor the media or the internet about this. But after that ended and there was a full mobilization, they shut down Wuhan and mobilized their entire medical system and entire country really to confront this. It seems like the response of the United States, who knew about the fact that there was this virus in Wuhan, because there were reports of people dropping dead on the street on American TV, yet no action was taken in the United States to prepare the United States. So you believe that basically they knew about it and they really didn't do anything to prepare. The question is, why didn't they prepare when they saw what was happening? Why didn't the United States government take the proper preparation after they saw what was happening in Wuhan? However, this virus leaked or developed, it was still a catastrophe for China that they had to close down a whole province and a whole city.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people, I think Trump bear a great deal of the response to think that he's alone. I saw a citation of Fauci, who's written many quarters, and he told USA Today at I'm trying to get the date for you so that I believe it was in February. I could get the exact date for you. That he said that the chances of it are minuscule, of it having a dramatic effect in the United States. So I think that certainly Trump has been foremost in calling it the flu and all of this business. But I think that a large part of the U.S. establishment, medical establishment, bears a good deal of responsibility in the immediate aftermath of this, and more broadly in allowing this biological warfare apparatus to emerge. It's not a scientifically driven endeavor. It is a geopolitical endeavor to have this dual use biowarfare, biodefense work done that has succeeded in creating more deadly pathogens, including making things like the avian airborne, in resurrecting the Spanish flu. There are science papers, I go through them in my article on, and where they do these things, but they manage to have a treatment for them. And again, these labs have accidents. So I think that there are a great number of failures, or I shouldn't even say betrayals, trust of the public trust by a deal of the political and medical establishment.
And one of the issues is as we were saying earlier, these biotech laboratories. And in California, there's a large biotech industry, and workers have been contaminated at these laboratories. Why isn't it there aren't health and safety protection for biotech workers in the United States? You would think that that would be a priority to protect those workers and thereby protect the public.
I'd love to learn more about that. If you followed that, I mean, I've seen some reports where there's this, a two-tier system where the scientists get all of these protections and so on, and then the workers who have to come in and clean up and so on get a much less protection in terms of the prospects of them somehow being exposed to some of these pathogens. You know about that.
Well, one of the issues is OSHA. The OSHA has been captured by these companies, these corporations, including Biotech. And nationally, OSHA does not do proper protection of these laboratories.
This is the occupational
national OSHA.
This is occupational safety,
health and safety,
occupational safety.
Mm-hmm. And a guy named David Bell in California worked at this Marone Laboratories in Davis, California, and he was they were bringing in biological material from Latin America, and he got contaminated in his body, and he got sick, and they told him nothing was wrong. Then he went and got on workers' comp, and then they fought his workers' compensation. And his mother proved that he had contaminated material in his body, that she showed that and brought him to, but he was basically contaminated for life. And there was no OSHA inspection. There was no OSHA examination. In fact, we discovered that OSHA in California doesn't even have the resources or the people responsible who can investigate what happens in a laboratory. Yet you have thousands, tens of thousands of biotech workers in California. And it's also the case of Becky McClain at the Pfizer laboratory in Connecticut, Groton, Connecticut, where there's 6,000 scientists. And she saw that a biological cabinet was leaking biological material, wasn't working properly. She complained about it. They said, we only do as much as the law requires. And she and other workers were contaminated. She got a genetically engineered disease in her body as a result of them not doing what was responsible at Pfizer. And Michael Caladabin, who was a professor at the University of Chicago, who was working on plague, actually, which was supposed to be safe, and it actually was a military project at the University of Chicago. He was contaminated. They didn't give him the vaccine. He died as a result of that. But these incidents around the country show actually that the protection of biotech workers in the United States is not there. That workers are getting contaminated and they're not properly protected. And it would seem that with all the money, the billions and billions of dollars that is going into biotech warfare and biological genetics for different things, you would have protection.
That's remarkable. I've looked at this issue fairly closely over the last month, and more generally since February. But I didn't know about those. So that makes me think that there's more and more. Part of what I am discerning is that there's an incredible amount of defensiveness in the field. That's why, the CDC, in response to my question, which was, is it a coincidence that this outbreak has city, Wuhan, that has China's only declared BSL-4 lab? That's the highest level lab, deals with the most deadly pathogens, probably has the most stringent safety requirements. I've said out that it also has a BSL-2 lab, lower level lab. They responded defensively. The CDC did when I asked them that question. And since then, there was a letter in the Lancet condemning conspiracies that are saying that it didn't come from nature, and this article in Nature Medicine that very coyly said it's not a laboratory construct. Well, doesn't mean it didn't come from a lab. It could have come out of a lab because the lab was tinctured. That means that it wasn't engineered. It doesn't mean they didn't use animal footage, that they didn't use radiation, that they didn't use other tech in order to make it. So they're willfully the public and the general media about this, and that fits into, I think, what you're pointing to, which is this, a total lack of accountability as to the consequences of their actions, which are very dangerous.
And unlike China, which has been able to at least control it, and also Taiwan and South Korea, the United States healthcare system seems to have been a disaster as far as proper preparation, PPE, equipment, training of workers. There are workers all over the country, frontline healthcare workers, transit workers, many who've died, and these meat plant workers. What does it say about American capitalism that it can't even protect frontline workers and workers who are critical to keep the country running?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just an extraordinary, dereliction of responsibility in terms of both the workers, the equipment. It shows the policies of not having universal health care, something like a single-payer system, and all of those contradictions of extremely short-sighted form of capitalism, so-called efficiencies of these, extended supply chains, all of the things that capitalism has, our form of corporate capitalism has striven to achieve, are coming back to bite it. And it's worked out quite well ended up getting their, bailout pads and so on. I mean, you still, the people who are responsible aren't the ones paying the price. The people paying the price are, truck drivers and delivery people and healthcare workers and so on and so forth.
And we're speaking with Sam Husseini with the Institute for Public Accuracy. And Sam, there has been an effort to tag people such as Frances Boyle as conspiratorialists, that they're weaving conspiracies about what has happened with this virus. Why don't you talk about Frances Boyle, what happened to him, and the effort to, in my view, prevent a debate and a discussion on what happened and why this happened?
Absolutely. I mean, Frances Boyle is the person who wrote the relevant U.S. statute. In 1989, Congress unanimously approved his law to domestic law that implemented the Biological Warfare Convention. And he drafted that along with the Council for Responsible Genetics. Unfortunately, in the years since, the Council for Responsible Genetics and another group along those lines working on these issues have both gone under. And as I say, a ton of money has flooded into biowarfare. So Frances Boyle has become kind of a lonely voice out there saying, you're violating the law that I wrote. And you do have one or two other people, Richard E. Bright at Rutgers, and Nass, who blogs Anthrax Vaccine, and a few people who have continued to talk about these very critical issues. But by and large, the money in the field has, I think, been a very corrupting thing. Professor Boyle, for months now, has been saying that he thinks there are engineered traces in the novel coronavirus. To my knowledge, that hasn't been backed up by a finding, a definitive finding from from scientists. Now that may happen, and indeed, about a week ago, a French Nobel Prize winner in medicine basically said the same thing. I go through that in my Salon article as well. So stay tuned for that. But the way that Frances has been dismissed has been outrageous. You had the so-called fact-checking website, Snopes or whatever it's called, as a lawyer with training in virology, without noting that he wrote the relevant statute. It's just outrageously disingenuous the way that he's being portrayed. He did an interview with Whitney Webb, who does some very interesting work. Last year she did some very comprehensive work on Jeffrey Epstein for Mint Press. Now she's writing for Last American Vagabond, and she quoted him in a piece. If you do a search on both of their names on Google, the piece doesn't come up. So it's there, but it's not findable through the primary corporate engine, and that Last American Vagabond demonetized by YouTube, which is of course owned by Google. So I think, which is doubly outrageous when you think about Trump and Fox and even some of the mainstream, for the first couple of months, were saying no big deal. They put people's health in jeopardy, and they don't get deplatformed. Frances Boyle and Last American Vagabond are getting deplatformed simply for saying these bioweapons things are a concern, and Boyle thinks it was bioengineered. It's completely outrageous. We need to have a discussion on these things. And if you have this looming threat of deplatforming and general constraints of the US media in terms of ownership and so on, it really stifles discussion.
And of course, these companies like Google and Apple at this point want to start tracking people and use the technology to track people, which they would do for not only the disease or the virus in some cases, but also for their own financial means and for making more profit. Frances Boyle said, and I interviewed him in February, early February, that in fact, the Chinese government did try to keep it a secret, which they did, and also that the WHO itself was slow in publicizing it. And in fact, there was a petition signed by over 350,000 people that it started in Korea, actually, calling for the removal of the head of the WHO. What was the role of the WHO? Because they did know it was transferred by air, and that it was getting out of control. Required that the Chinese government shut down the prefecture, the state of Wuhan, and yet it wasn't until March the 11th, I believe, that they did call a world pandemic. Do you think that they were remiss in not really warning the world that they had a serious problem that needed to be dealt with internationally?
And track the line on that, but that's certainly my impression that the WHO was remiss and have poo-pooed all kinds of things, the dangers of this, as well as they I believe have also been dismissive of it, of possible lab origin. The one thing that I think, and I haven't investigated this, that the WHO was right about was we got tests and blew them off. So it's the one time that they're right seems to be when they probably should have been listened to. In terms of the tracking, Google and so on, I've seen extensive reports that Israel has taken the lead on using, the corona pandemic, um, even more extensive measures in terms of surveillance and tracking individuals. So I think that there are points of intersection between those two things in terms of high tech as we traditionally think of it, and biological high tech in terms of exploiting the current situation for surveillance.
And the voices, your voice, Frances Boyle, others who are raising questions or raising some of the problems or the contradictions have been silenced. There's been an effort to shut down these views. And where is this going to end? Because the right to investigate and the right to examine the actual history of this virus, what happened, how it developed, and also the role of U.S. government and corporations in the United States. It seems like they don't want their own record examined. Is that the case you feel?
Absolutely. And I think we're in a very dangerous place. Biowarfare is a natural issue for progressive elements, for the left, for concerned with disarmament and militarization and so on. And right now, it looks like it's going to largely be in the hands of the anti-Chinese right that's going to attempt to paint this as a uniquely bad Chinese thing and totally ignore the fact that US labs are also extremely dangerous and been violating and been involved in biowarfare. And that this biowarfare push has been led by the United States. I mean, China is just basically trying to catch up here. So that's the far bigger story. And I fear that parts of the left, I mean, even Democracy Now! Not too long ago had somebody from EcoHealth Alliance on who was involved with the labs in Wuhan. And I mean, EcoHealth Alliance, like a really nice and earthy, crunchy name. They have, they have scientizers who used to work at Fort Detrick, the main bioweapons facility for the United States government. They are working with scientists in Wuhan to do what's called gain of function, this type of research to make pathogens more deadly. This should lead to major scrutiny, not to bring on these people who ostensibly are trying to protect us against the next pandemic. And I mean, Frances Boyle thinks that there's no good in any of the work that they do. Richard Ebright at Rutgers calls it crazy adventure. Claim that they are protecting us, but some of the work that they're doing may severely endangering us. And these people, like EcoHealth Alliance, any of the scientists who are doing this work, who are just been getting a free ride in the corporate media, need to have a light shine on them, saying, "Hold on, is the work that you're doing actually conceivably part of the problem?"
And that hasn't been raised once by the corporate media, ABC, NBC, PBS, NPR, none of them, that in fact there have been violations of the biowarfare laws in the United States by US companies, universities, and the US government.
That's right. Now, in terms of the Biowarfare Convention, a book came out on it in 1992, edited by Wright. And she notes that she argues that there has to be more stringent implementation of biowarfare and a new set of laws. But the current law, including the one Frances Boyle, to her interpretation, allows for something is called defensive. It's okay, even though if it just simply by claiming a defensive motive, it suddenly becomes okay. Now, Frances Boyle says, no, it's accurate. In his law and in the original treaty, the word defense does not appear. It makes an exception for prophylactic or peaceful purposes. And Professor Boyle makes the point, not a peaceful purpose. Recruiting, a more deadly pathogen under the pretext that you're going to find a way to fight against it is not a peaceful purpose. And there is no exception for defensive purposes. So you get into legal semantics on the issue. But it's clear as day that they are violating at minimum the spirit of the law. And it's, I mean, a lot of people, after my piece came out, a lot of people commented, oh, the real problem is factory farms and deforestation, and that may well be the cause. And that may well be the cause. In the course of trying to protect ourselves from consequences of those humans, of deforestation and factory farms, we are doing this dangerous warfare work, which is another level of human intervention, another level of dangerousness. The reasonable thing, I think, a good case can be made would be to slow down those activities of deforestation and factory farm, and not to attempt to remedy the situation by engaging in this doubly dangerous biowarfare work.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much, Sam. We've been talking with Sam Husseini. He's a reporter who's done an important article on the developments of this virus, where it came from, and disputes over its origin and how it's been covered. And he's with the Institute for Public Accuracy. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek.
Thanks so much, Steve.